This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa, and today marks the beginning of Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths limited review week on my channel. The full spoiler dropped earlier today, and that means that over the next week or so, I'll be bringing you a new video every day about this new limited format. This will include a top 10 on the biggest bombs of the format and an archetype guide. But, as usual, this will start with a set review. I'll make a video for each color, as well as one about the remaining cards, artifacts, colorless cards, multicolored cards, and lands. And a new video will be out every day from today until I've looked at every card in the set. Today, we're starting with white. To evaluate these cards, I use a letter grade system to sort of sum up my overall feelings about a card. If you don't know what my grades mean, they are described in the description below. While the letter grade helps me sum things up, the most important thing to take away is my overall discussion of each card. Keep in mind that this set is for limited only. This means draft and sealed and nothing else. Also keep in mind that this is my initial impressions about the format. I, of course, haven't played the format yet. And that means I, of course, won't have everything right. Near the end of the limited format of Ikoria, I will, of course, do a video on the things that I got wrong, as I always do. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's get to our first card in Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths. Our first card is Blade Banish, which for 3 generic and a white is a common instant that says exile target creature with power 4 or greater. We always see cards like this in every limited format, the white card that destroys a big creature. They aren't generally premium removal because of their cost and restrictions, but in most formats your opponent will have enough creatures that this kills that it's fine to play in your deck. And in this format, which has a lot of big boys, after all it is the Lair of Behemoths, it might even be a bit better. Still, it isn't something you usually want more than one of, even if the first copy is fine. I think this is just a C. Next up, it's Checkpoint Officer, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/2 human soldier at common, and for 1 generic and a white, you can tap it to tap target creature. This isn't quite Master Decoy. They are identical, other than that this costs an additional mana to tap stuff down, but that's close enough to Master Decoy to still be a pretty high quality common. Tap effects tend to be great, and it is a kind of pseudo-removal that is good all game long. It may be even better than usual in this format, because it's loaded up with huge monsters and mutate, and tapping down one guy might be bigger than it normally would. Master Decoy is usually a B- or so, and while this does cost more to use the ability, it seems like the format is loaded up with mutate and enough other huge monsters that this will be a little better for this effect than most formats. As a result, I think it's a common that you will first pick in some of the weaker packs in this format, and one of White's best commons overall. I'm giving it a B-. Next up, we have Coordinated Charge, which for 4 generic and a white is a common instant, and it says creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn, and it has cycling for 2 generic mana. Cycling is a returning mechanic. What it means is you can pay a cost and discard the card to draw a card. So cycling being back is great. It's always good for limited formats because adding it to situational or narrow cards means that that card will never be dead, and that's basically the case here. This costs 1 more than Inspired Charge to do the same sort of thing, but the problem with other mass pump effects like this is they tend to not be very useful when you're behind on the board. When that's the case, you can pitch this, and that's not something you can do with most spells like this. Still, even with cycling, I'm not huge on this type of effect in limited, especially at 5 mana. Unless there's a really awesome go wide deck, and while there is a bit of that here, I don't feel like there's enough for this to be always making the cut in your white decks. I think you'll play it some of the time, if your deck is good at going wide, or you have a bunch of cycling payoffs, 2 things white decks will probably be able to do. Cycling in the end does keep this out of the range of being a D+, but I think it only gets to a C-. Next up, there's Cub Warden, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/5 cat at rare. It has the mutate mechanic, one of the really interesting things about this set. And with mutate, you can pay 2 generic and 2 white and pay that alternate cost. Then you put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate into the creature on top, plus all abilities from under it. In other words, the top creature's stats and, well, everything else are part of the creature, and any creature underneath the top creature only has its text box relevant on the mutated creature. In this case, Cub Warden has lifelink, and it says, whenever this creature mutates, create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. This mutate mechanic is really intriguing. It is potentially difficult to judge because it's so unique, but obviously I'm going to do my best to do so. So, creatures with the mutate mechanic are kind of like split cards, and split cards are always nice because of their flexibility. This can just be a 4 mana 3/5 with lifelink, a pretty attractive card already, nothing special, probably close to a C+, but very playable. But in this case, it also holds on to the mutate upside, even if you just cast it normally first, so that if you ever happen to mutate something onto it, you get those cat tokens later as well. You can also cast it for the mutate cost and either put it on top of another non-human creature you control. Basically, if the creature is bigger than 3/5, you probably want to put the Cub Warden underneath it, effectively giving a big creature lifelink and making a couple of tokens. If the creature you're mutating on is smaller, you probably want to put it on top, making whatever it is into a 3/5 with lifelink, plus whatever abilities the bottom creature had, and you also get those 2 1/1 tokens. One of the cool things about Mutate is it doesn't just involve thinking more about the cards with Mutate. Mutate also makes it so that with any non-human creature in the format, you have to consider how good it would be if it was mutated onto. Like, if it is a small creature but has powerful abilities, it will be more attractive than usual. Something to keep in mind about Mutate that is not intuitive, by the way, is that if you target a creature with the Mutate cost, your opponent killing the creature you are mutating onto in response does not cause a 2-for-1, as you would think it would. Instead, the creature comes down. The mutate creature comes down, in this case Cub Warden, just as a regular old 3/5 with lifelink. However, if you wait to kill the creature after they have mutated together, you do get the 2-for-1. Of course, with a creature like the Cub Warden, it won't be a real 2-for-1 because the mutate trigger will still have happened and they'll have those tokens. Anyway, with that long mutate aside out of the way, how good is Cub Warden? Pretty darn good. I think it gets around the risk of 2-for-1s that all mutate creatures will have, and it will frequently be giving you a ton of value whichever way you end up casting it. I think this is easily first pickable and almost into the bomb range. I'm giving it a B+. Next up, we have DeSquad Marshal, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/3 human soldier at common, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Here's a card that will make you consider playing board pump spells. A 4-mana card that gives you 4/4 worth of stats across 2 bodies is pretty nice. Humans are one of the main themes in this format, too, and this gives you 2 human bodies with 1 card, which will be nice with some of those payoffs. This is a solid common for white decks. If you're ahead, it helps you get further ahead, and when you're behind, it's a real roadblock. It's nice for commons to be solid in both scenarios. I don't think you want to be taking this too early, though. I'm starting it at C+. Next up, we have Divine Arrow, which for 1 generic and a white is a common instant, and it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This is a reprint from War of the Spark, and it was fine there. I like the efficiency. 4 damage for 2 mana means you will often trade up. It is definitely situational, though the situation it asks for isn't far-fetched. Something with 4 or less toughness needs to be attacking or blocking, and then Divine Arrow can kill it. Still, it is situational enough that I don't consider it to be premium removal, and it really wasn't the last time either. It also tends to get worse in multiples since it becomes easier for opponents to play around it. I'm going to give it a C+. It is a solid removal spell, but definitely not premium. Next up, we have Braniff Healer, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/2 human cleric at common, and whenever you cycle another card, you gain 1 life, and he can cycle for 1 mana. A 2-mana 2/2 with this ability is fairly underwhelming. Adding cycling to it does make it better, since there are various other payoffs for cycling in this set that are better than this guy, and having cycling in general makes him better too, because sometimes you don't need a 2-mana 2/2, you need to try to find a removal spell or your bomb, or maybe a land drop, and you can just cycle him away when you end up in that situation, but he's still just a pretty, underwhelming card overall. I think he's just a solid playable for white decks. I'm giving him a C. Next up, we have Braniff Magistrate, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/3 human wizard at rare. It says your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So, this is the kind of card really printed with Constructed in mind. In most limited games in this format, this hate bear isn't going to have anything to hate on, so he's effectively just a 2-mana 1/3. He is a human, which has some tribal support here for sure, but still, he's not something you really want to run most of the time unless you're desperate for 2-drops. I'm giving him a D. Next up, it's Fight as One, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon instant, and it says choose one or both. Target human creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn, or target non-human creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn. This reminds me a lot of River Herald's Boon from Ixalan, a card that turned out to be pretty incredible in that format. Now, they aren't identical. The Boon gave +1/+1 counters as a permanent boost instead of a temporary one, but the Boon also cost 2 mana and didn't grant indestructibility for a turn. I start to be very interested in tricks once they're cheap and they have the possibility of allowing you to 2-for-1 your opponent, and that is definitely what we have here. In addition to that, because indestructibility is granted, you can use it to blank some removal spells too, and generally at a price much cheaper than what your opponent is paying. It just seems like this will have a fine floor of +1/+1 and indestructibility, and a very impressive ceiling where you can give 2 things the boost. And yeah, that will blow out your opponent sometimes. Now, it does have a real setup cost. You have to have a nice mix of humans and non-humans, something I think will happen in decks in this format, but it won't just always be the case. So, overall, though, I am pretty high on this as far as tricks go. I don't quite think I want to give it the B- that River Herald's Boon ended up being. That format was pretty unique, but I am willing to start at a C+. I can't imagine aggressive white decks cutting this first copy very often, and it could end up being as good as the Boon for sure, but I'm going to start it at C+, but it's definitely a card that I wouldn't be surprised to turn out to be even better. Next is Flourishing Fox, which for 1 white mana is a 1/1 Fox at uncommon, and whenever you cycle another card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Flourishing Fox, and it has cycling 1. This is a nicer cycling build around than the life gain guy. The fact that it has cycling itself is pretty nice too. Sometimes you'll draw this late without any ways to make it bigger, but you can throw it away for something else, which is a nice fail case. But if you get this down early and just cycle a few times, you're going to get a great return on your investment. I like that a lot of the cycling payoffs also have cycling too, as it seems like it will make it easier to make these decks work in limited. This is a nice card, but not one to take super early, or I don't even really think it's one that's going to pull you into the cycling deck. But if you're already in white and you have a few cards with cycling, which is just going to happen, it's a solid card. I'm giving him a C+. Next up, it's Garrison Cat, which for 1 white mana is a 1/1 cat at common, and when it dies, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. I'm not usually hugely impressed with this kind of creature unless it gives me a token with flying or something. This is a little more interesting than normal because it seems like there are a decent number of mutate creatures with low mutate costs, and some of them will really pay you off for playing a 1-drop, and adding the ability to get a token does often soften the blow of potentially getting 2-for-1 too. I don't imagine this being something that always makes the cut or anything, but I think you'll play it enough that it doesn't quite drop into the D range. I'm going to give it a C-. Next up, it's Helical Glider, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/2 Nightmare Squirrel at common, and it enters the battlefield with your choice of a flying counter or a first strike counter on it. So this set has keyword counters, as you can see here. It's an interesting new thing in this set, and Helical Glider gives you a choice between 2 of them. This is a nice common. I think most of the time you're going to go with the flying option, but sometimes first strike will be better. It is nice on turn 3, and then later in the game, a nice thing to mutate on top of thanks to the keyword ability it brings with it. So basically, it's a white Windrake with a bit of extra upside, and I think that's enough for a C these days. Next up, it's Huntmaster Liger, which costs 3 generic and a white for a 3/4 cat at uncommon. It has mutate for 2 generic and a white, and when it mutates, other creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. So a 4 mana 3/4 with some mutate upside is what this is in its most basic form, and that's probably enough to be at least a C. But the mutate upside here is pretty nice, pumping your whole team. You can cast it for that mutate cost and upgrade, say, a 2/2 into a 3/4 and pump your whole team, and that's a pretty good investment for 3 mana. And that's before it even gets really silly, which is when you start mutating more and more things on top of it. It does have sort of weird synergy with itself in that it's asking you to pile as many cards as you can on top of it to pump your team more and more, and yet by doing so, you're actually not going wide. But still, I just imagine there being so many scenarios where this has a really big impact on the board when it mutates, and it has a fail case of being a 4 mana 3/4, and I think those two things together are enough for it to be a B-. At the same time, it worries me a little bit that this is not one of these mutate creatures that gives you card advantage and helps you avoid really getting killed by a 2-for-1, but I think the power is high enough here that you want to first pick it in some weaker packs. Next up, it's Imposing Vanta Soar, which for 5 generic and a white is a 3/6 dinosaur at common. It's got Vigilance and Cycling 1. Cycling goes a long way towards making cards playable when they wouldn't really have been otherwise, and that's definitely the case here. A 6 mana 3/6 with Vigilance is a D. It really only does one thing well, and that's blocking, and the stats aren't even that efficient for the amount of mana. Adding Cycling 1 to this makes a world of difference, though. This means you can cast it when you need a defensive guy, when he's at his best, and cycle it away in other situations. Cycling 1 is a pretty good deal, too, and it helps you hit land drops early or find your bomb late. It doesn't hurt that white is one of the main cycling payoff colors either, as we've already seen a little bit. Vigilance also matters a little bit in this format. The green-white deck's main thing is being built around Vigilance, so those things help save it too, but I think cycling does the most to get it out of that D range and push it up to a C-. Next up, we have Keen Sight Mentor, which for 2 generic and a white is a 1/4 human cleric at uncommon, and when it enters the battlefield, you put a vigilance counter on target non-human creature you control. You can pay 1 generic and a white and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with vigilance. See, there's a vigilance payoff. Vigilance isn't the most amazing keyword ability. It doesn't make a creature evasive or anything, but it is fine. And at worst, just like all the mentors, there's a whole cycle of them, just gives one thing vigilance, and then in the later game, you can pay mana to make that creature progressively larger. That's a nice late game mana sink, and if you have more creatures with vigilance, it gets even better. A 3 mana 1/4 isn't great, but overall, I think this is a nice card for most white decks, giving it a C+. Next up, it's Lava Brink Venturer, who for 2 generic and a white is a 3/3 human soldier at rare. When it enters the battlefield, choose odd or even, and Lava Brink Adventurer has protection from each converted mana cost of the chosen value. This seems pretty good. A 3 mana 3/3 is usually a C anyway, and the upside this has is very real. Because you get to choose odd or even, you can always choose whatever choice gives you the best advantage on the board. Sure, sometimes your opponent will have a mix of creatures that are odd and even, and that will be annoying, but your fail case is still an efficient creature, making it so you can indefinitely block cards of odd or even mana costs, attack through creatures of certain mana costs, and blank removal spells of certain mana costs is some real power. I do think I'm reluctant to go with a straight up B here, just because I know there will be some of the time where he's just that 3 mana 3/3. But let's go with B-, which means you can first pick Lava Brink Adventurer in some packs. Next up, it's Light of Hope, which for 1 white mana is a common instant, and it says choose one. You gain 4 life, destroy target enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. I don't know why they didn't call this a charm. It's an instant that gives you 3 choices, so it really feels like it should be. But anyway, how good is it in Limited? I don't think very. Modality is nice, and obviously makes this flexible, but all 3 of the modes here are pretty underwhelming. Gaining 4 life is often negligible. You want to have a ton of enchantment targets in this set, and 1 mana for a +1/+1 counter isn't so great either, though it would be the option you choose the most. In the right situation, it can become a combat trick that helps a creature win a battle, or used in response to damage-based removal to save your creature. The problem is, those situations aren't going to be happening a whole lot. With all that negative stuff out of the way, I do think this is a reasonable sideboard card. That's because it gives you enchantment hate that actually does something in other scenarios too. I think this is a D as a main board card, but a C against an opponent who has 3 or more enchantments. Next up, it's Luminous Broodmoth, who for 2 generic and 2 white is a 3/4 insect at Mythic Rare. It has flying, and it says whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. Wow, so a 4 mana 3/4 flyer is already a great rate for Limited, probably a B-, maybe even a B. Then this has an insane ability, making all of your non-flying creatures not only come back from the graveyard, but also giving them flying. The Broodmoth will frequently destabilize the board. I mean, think about it. You play your Moth and suddenly you can attack with a bunch of creatures you may not have wanted to attack with before. This puts your opponent in a nasty situation where they have to decide whether to just take damage or block them and let them come back as flyers. In many ways, this means the Broodmoth has an immediate impact on the board, since it will in most cases at least make combat hard for your opponent, even if they untap and kill the Moth right away. So yeah, between its own impressive stats and bringing creatures back from the graveyard with flying, it's hard to say that this isn't a bomb. I'm giving it an A. Next up, it's Majestic Auracorn, which for 4 generic and a white is a 4/4 unicorn at uncommon, and it has mutate for 3 generic and a white. It has vigilance, and it says whenever this creature mutates, you gain 4 life. So how good would this be if it were just a 5 mana 4/4 with Vigilance? Probably a C- or a C. Overall, this seems kind of underwhelming compared to a lot of the mutate creatures in this set. If you're playing this for its mutate cost on turn 4, you're probably upgrading one of your creatures to a 4/4 Vigilance and gaining 4 life. Other times, you'll be paying 4 to give something bigger Vigilance and gain 4 life. While that's decent, it seems like most of the time, the risk is not going to be worth the reward here. The mutate creatures who give you big rewards that make it so getting potentially 2 for 1 doesn't hurt as much are the ones I'm really after, and this isn't that. I think this is just decent, and not much more than that. This might be an example of a mutate creature you actually end up hard casting more, because it definitely seems like you're getting closer to 5 mana worth of value when you're just going with the creature. So yeah, I'm giving it a C. Next up we have Mained Serval, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/4 cat at common and it has Vigilance. Those are some pretty beefy defensive stats for a 2-drop, especially one that has Vigilance. Slower decks will be running this for sure, and it isn't the worst thing to mutate onto either, since it gives the mutated creature Vigilance, which, again, not the most exciting keyword, but hey, and doesn't hurt that Vigilance is one of the main archetypes in this format. I do think more aggressive decks will definitely steer clear of this, but I think white decks will play it enough that it deserves a C-. Next up, we have Mythos of Snap decks, which for 2 generic and 2 white is a rare sorcery, and it says each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest. If black and red was spent to cast this spell, you choose the permanents for each player instead. So there's a cycle of these monocolored Mythos that all do something extra if you're playing one of the wedges. This one has a Cataclysm effect, an effect that is often underwhelming and limited. It's just so dependent on board states, because if your opponent has an advantage over you because they have the best creature on the board, well, that advantage isn't going to change when you cast this, at least if you were paying all white for it. If your opponent has an advantage over you because their board is huge, then it will help, and both of those situations will happen. I'm just saying there will be times where this card's pretty bad. However, if you pay Mardu for this thing, you get around that problem since you make choices for your opponent, and that is truly devastating. I think of the cycle of Mythos, this is the one that gets the biggest upgrade by paying all 3 colors. The others have a better floor than this, but this might have the highest ceiling. I think you should try pretty hard to find a way to go 3 colors if you have the Mythos because of that. Still, it is weird to give a card like this just 1 grade because it varies wildly to how good it is, both depending on the board state and depending on whether you can pay the 3 colors of mana for it. I guess I'm going to say it's like a C+ if you aren't able to get the bonus effect. It would be an A+ in a deck that always got the bonus effect, but that seems pretty impossible. So let's say it's a B+ in a deck that can get the bonus at least some of the time. Next up, it's Pacifism. For 1 generic and a white, it's an enchantment aura at common with enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. Pacifism's a great card every time we see it in limited, which is a lot. 2 mana to take away what are normally the 2 most important things creatures can do in limited, attacking and blocking, is just amazing efficiency, and it makes Pacifism a premium removal spell. It does have downsides. It doesn't shut off static or activated abilities. Your opponent can bounce their creature and make Pacifism fall off. But the downside is always worth it for the efficiency, and most of the time, those downsides won't even matter. As usual, Pacifism is a B, and likely one of white's best commons. Next up, we have Patagia Tiger, which for 4 generic and a white is a 3/4 cat at common. It's got flying, and when it enters the battlefield, target human you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. A 5 mana 3/4 flyer is usually a serviceable, if unexciting card in limited, a C- at least. This brings additional upside in that it can pump humans. White and black especially is the human color pair, but all color pairs will have some humans and some non-humans in their decks. But it'll be at its best in those black-white decks, and a nice common for those decks, because giving one of your humans +2/+2 is often enough to make an attack possible that just wasn't before. Worth noting, too, that the Tiger sometimes giving something +2/+2 either won't happen or it won't matter. And I think all of that sort of keeps the Tiger sort of in the middle. I think it's just a solid playable for white decks. I think you kind of hope you're not playing more than 1 copy of this in most cases, but let's start it at C. Next up, we have Perimeter Sergeant, who for 2 generic and a white is a 3/2 human soldier at common, and when it attacks, other humans you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. A 3 mana 3/2 with Battlecry for humans seems like a nice payoff for going wide with human tokens. As we've seen, there are several human payoffs in this color, so the Sergeant will definitely be seeing play in most white decks, but how good is he? Well, There will be some scenarios where he comes down on turn 3 and on turn 4 allows you to hit your opponent really hard. But you have to keep in mind, chances aren't great the Sergeant will survive that first attack since he's only a 3/2. Still, like, the ideal situation here is probably your opponent trading for him and taking some extra damage, and that's not bad for a 3-mana investment. I think the Sergeant will often enable attacks that you just didn't have before often enough that he's a solid white common, but I think he'll also do nothing often enough that he's just a C. Next up, we have Sanctuary Lockdown, which for 2 generic and a white is an uncommon enchantment. It says humans you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 2 and tap 2 untap humans you control to tap target creature an opponent controls. Obviously this is a build around, but it's definitely a nice one, not only providing humans with an Anthem effect, but also being able to use humans to tap stuff down. That can be truly devastating in some situations where you, say, have 4 humans in play. It can just tap down both of your opponent's best blockers at the end of their turn. This means that this card is useful in multiple scenarios, whether you need to be aggressive or defensive. Still, it does need a build around grade. I think a human deck that only has like 6 or 7 humans in it probably won't like this that much, and I think your average deck will probably have 5 or 6 humans in it in white to begin with, but I think that kind of means it's a D+ in your average white deck. But if your deck is really human heavy and you're getting to 8, 9, and 10 humans, it's going to be one of the best cards in your deck. I think it's a B- in that case. Because of this, if your pack's like best pick isn't something that interesting, like your pack 1 pick 1, I think sometimes you can pick this because it has such a nice ceiling. But keep in mind you may just end up not being able to play it. Next up, it's Savai Sabertooth, which for 1 generic and a white is a 3/1 cat at common. And that's it. 2-mana 3/1s tend to be fine 2-drops for aggressive decks. That's a C-. Not much else to say. Next up, we have Snare Tactician, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/3 human at common, and whenever you cycle a card, you tap target creature an opponent controls. This has mediocre stats, but a nice cycling trigger. Tapping down an opponent's thing on their turn is usually the nicest thing to do here, because it means you shut down both an attack and a block from one creature, which will feel pretty good when you are drawing a card anyway off of cycling. This seems like a solid payoff for cycling decks in the format, but I don't think it's going to be one of the premier payoffs for it either. I'm giving it a C. Next up, we have Solid Footing, which for 1 white mana is a common aura with flash and enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and as long as enchanted creature has vigilance, it assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. This having flash is nice, because in some scenarios, it will allow you to use it as a combat trick that kind of sticks around. In situations where your creature has high toughness and vigilance, it will be especially surprising for your opponent. If you manage to take down an opposing creature and keep yours alive, you're going to feel fine about this because it's so cheap and because it means you will no longer get straight up 2-for-1 if the creature you put it on is killed. But while the green-white deck is all about vigilance, I still don't think you can count on getting the extra value out of this often enough for it to be more than a D+. It's too situational and dangerous most of the time to be worth it. If you do end up with enough vigilance, this may get closer to a C, but I'm going with a D+ for now. Next up, we have Splendor Mayor, who for 2 generic and a white is a 3/3 uncommon elk unicorn with lifelink, and you can cycle it for 1 generic and a white, and when you do, you put a lifelink counter on target creature you control. I like this whole cycle, and that includes the Mayor. A 3-mana 3/3 with lifelink is probably already at least a C+, then you add the cycling upside here and you have something really nice. Ping 1 and a white to draw a card, and permanently give something lifelink is a nice option to have, in addition to just having an efficient creature. The lifelink keyword is great to mutate big boys onto as well, and whether you cycle this or cast it, you'll usually have something with lifelink to mutate onto later in the game. Cycling is a well-supported mechanic in this set, as I've said. So, yeah, I think you can get away with taking this with an early pick or even a first pick in some weaker packs. I'm giving it a B-. Next up, we have Spontaneous Flight, which for 2 generic and a white is a common instant, and it says target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put a flying counter on it. So, 3-mana tricks have to do a lot for me to be interested in them. Usually the best tricks are the cheap ones that can allow you to come out ahead on mana and basically really efficiently kill your opponent's stuff. I demand efficiency if I'm going to be doing something risky, like playing a trick. The stats boost offered by Spontaneous Flight would not normally be good enough for this to be a trick worth playing. I would probably give this an F if that's what it was. But adding a flying counter to the mix is a huge upgrade. Permanently giving something flying is great and is often enough to shake up most board states. In addition to that, you can also use this to make a lethal swing in the air, giving it sort of a secondary use. Now, you shouldn't do that unless it will be lethal, of course, but it's nice to have that additional use. So, yeah, I think despite this being a more expensive trick, it does enough that aggressive decks will probably feel fine about playing that first copy. I'm giving it a C. It's still a trick with all the usual problems they have, but C is pretty decent for a trick. Next up we have Stormwild Caprador, which for 2 generic and a white is a 1/3 bird goat at uncommon. It's got flying, and it says if non-combat damage would be dealt to Stormwild Caprador, prevent that damage. Put a +1/+1 counter on Stormwild Caprador for each 1 damage prevented this way. So, mostly, this is a 3-mana 1/3 with flying. That's not a card you normally play. Sure, it has a little bit of additional upside. Damage-based removal doesn't work on it, and in fact, it just makes it bigger. I guess the idea here is that you can mutate stuff onto this to get its abilities, but even then, you're getting flying, but the other narrow ability just won't matter very much. One of the funnier things you can do with this is run damage-based board sweepers in your deck, which it will be immune to and grow from, but yeah, I'm still not really in on this. I think you play it sometimes if you're going hard on mutate, but its ability just won't matter most of the time. I think you cut it more than you play it. I'm giving it a D+. Next up, it's Swallow Whole, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon sorcery, and it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, tap an untapped creature you control. Then it says exile target tapped creature, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature tapped to pay this spell's additional cost. This is a cool design. 1 white mana to exile a tapped creature would be a B, maybe even a B+. It is situational, but so efficient it doesn't matter. Obviously, this isn't quite that. It makes you tap one of your creatures to pay for the cost, and that won't always be a cost you can easily pay. The upside is that the creature you tap also gets a +1/+1 counter, so you get to kill something and make one of your creatures permanently bigger, but it is also tapped during your opponent's next turn, and that is a downside. I think this setup will be frustrating sometimes, but I think this is too efficient to not want to take with early picks. It also works well with the Vigilance theme because you can actually attack with a creature and then use Swallow Whole, which you won't be able to do with a lot of creatures. But overall, yeah, this is premium removal. I think you take it early frequently, giving it a B-. Next up, it's Valiant Rescuer, who for 1 generic and a white is a 3/1 human soldier at uncommon, and whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token, and it has cycling too. This seems like a sweet cycling build around. As we saw earlier in this video, a 2 mana 3/1 is usually a C- anyway. If you add cycling alone to this guy, that probably gets him to at least a C, since you can just cycle him on boards where you really don't want a 3/1. But then, the ability to make a 1/1 token the first time you cycle every turn is really nice. I don't think it's crazy to imagine this guy making 2 or 3 tokens most games because there's so much cycling in this set, and if he's doing that, he's doing a really good job. I think he's a B-. I think you can take him with an early pick. Next up, it's Vulpikeet, which for 3 generic and a white is a 2/3 Foxbird at uncommon. It has Mutate for 2 generic and a white, and it has Flying. And when it mutates, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. A 4 mana 2/3 flyer is pretty subpar, probably a D+, maybe a C- at best, so that's a good place to start with this card. Obviously, it's better than that. Even if you can just cast it as a regular creature, it's something worth mutating onto later to make it bigger and get that counter. And if you play a creature on turn 2, you can also mutate this onto it to have a 3/4 flyer that can attack right away with all the additional abilities of the bottom card. Now, the best mutate creatures in this set help you avoid the danger of a 2-for-1, and this one doesn't do that on its own, and for that reason, I don't think it's amazing, but still, it's a card with 2 different modes. The mutate mode seems the most efficient, but is also the most dangerous. At the same time, there will definitely be games where someone mutates this on a 2-drop, and then nobody can remove the 3/4 flyer, and it just takes over the game. Still though, the sort of median between these possibilities probably means this is a C. It's fine, but I don't think much else more than that. I could see this being a card I'm wrong about. Maybe it just turns out it's not that easy to remove the 3/4 flyer, and there are just a lot of games where someone slaps a Vulpikeet on something and it takes the game over. But for now, I'm sort of in the middle on this. I think it's a C. Next up, we have Will of the All Hunter, which for 1 generic and a white is an uncommon instant, and it says target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's blocking, instead, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and it has cycling for 2. 2 mana for +2/+2 and nothing else is usually like a D. It does help a creature win combat, but it isn't all that efficient. However, this has a lot more going on than that. I think this is a cool design for a trick too, since it's technically better on the block because the counters are permanent. Then it also has cycling if you draw it and you don't need a combat trick, which will be the case sometimes. One of the issues with tricks can be how situational they are, but this mitigates against that for sure by being better on blocking and by also helping you cycle. I think you will always run the first of these in aggressive white decks, but it is still a trick, and not one that you can get 2-for-1s out of or anything in most cases, so it's hard to go above a C. Well, those are all the white cards in Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths. Tomorrow, I'll be back to talk about all the blue cards in the set. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch the rest of this set review, don't forget to subscribe. And if there's things you disagree about, talk about them in the comments. I'll talk about them with you as well. It's a good way to get into a format. Having discussions about these cards helps you think differently about the cards. So again, I'll be back tomorrow for the blue limited review. Thanks for watching.